What if I told you that the original copy of the Declaration of Independence is actually missing, and that it may hold the secret to a centuries-old treasure that's just waiting to be found? Written in 1776, the Declaration is the pivotal beginning of our democracy, but there's so much that's not known about it. Many historians insist that, contrary to popular belief, the cornerstone of our country was actually signed on August 2nd and not on July 4th. And some also say that Thomas Jefferson was not its main author. It's time to decode the Declaration of Independence. I'm Brad Meltzer. I've spent my life collecting stories, signs, symbols, and codes hidden in plain sight. Some have become the basis for my novels, but I've only scratched the surface. And now history's given me the resources to investigate the rest. This is Decoded.
How are you?
I am smiling because today we're investigating the Declaration of Independence.
What do we not know about the Declaration of Independence?
You tell me. Did you know there's an actual secret handprint on the back of it?
Really? The Declaration of Independence, a handprint.
This is not a movie. I didn't make this up. This is real life.
Really?
Come on.
You guys are going to the National Archives for a close-up look at the actual Declaration of Independence.
Fantastic.
Oh, that is
Wow.
really awesome.
I've never seen it. This is going to be great.
Make sure you ask all the hard questions. Can't wait to hear what you find.
Okay.
Excellent. Hey, thanks for this one. Sounds great. Have you ever been here, Scott?
Actually, it's been a long time. I came here in 8th grade on a field trip, and we had to wait about 3 hours to get in, so.
We will not have to wait 3 hours.
I know.
Wow.
It kind of feels like being in a church or something, doesn't it? Oh, God.
Great men huddled around this thing and taking such care about the wording itself.
It makes you realize, I mean, just how human this thing was, that they sat down and wrote out what
Right,
they
yeah.
believed and all
Absolutely.
signed it. Signing this thing, you could end up being hung. I mean, signing this thing was treasonous.
Oh, that's it.
And this was their mother country.
Well, that just shows how deep the beliefs must have run. I mean, to really be willing to give it all up for it.
It's easy to forget what a dangerous piece of paper the Declaration of Independence was in 1776. England was the greatest superpower in the entire world, and America was just a ragtag group of 13 tiny colonies. But the Founding Fathers wanted to make the biggest, boldest statement possible. The Declaration of Independence wasn't a simple act of defiance, it was a statement of war. Signing it literally amounted to taking your life in your hands.
We're decoding the Declaration of Independence and want to sort through fact and fiction if we can.
How can we sometimes hear about someone finding the Declaration of Independence at a yard sale or in their attic?
The one that people are finding and turning up at yard sales and thrift stores, like you mentioned, are the Dunlap broadsides. Those are the printed version that was done the night of July 4th. We think there was possibly about 200 that were printed that night.
And there was only one that they signed on that day, or did they sign multiple copies?
Actually, this wasn't signed. Kind of popular belief is that this was actually signed on July 4th. This was not signed on July 4th.
This is why I love the National Archives. Trevor just put a whole new spin on the idea of Independence Day. Despite what most people think, July 4th wasn't the day we declared our independence or the day we signed the Declaration. July 2nd was the day we declared independence from Great Britain, and August 2nd, the day we signed the document. We celebrate on July 4th simply because that's the day that the Founding Fathers went public. July 4th would later become significant for another reason. The only two presidents to sign the Declaration of Independence, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, competitive to the very end, both died on July 4th, 1826, 50 years after they helped write this great document.
Okay, so someone took this writing, typeset it,
Correct.
and printed it.
And then printed it, and then that was sent out to the various colonies and to some generals in the army.
There's another example of what we think to be true and what is actually true are not the same.
Right.
One common misconception about the Declaration is that all of our founding fathers signed it. But in fact, among those who didn't is arguably the most famous, the big man himself, George Washington. The great general was actually in New York City at the time, preparing the Continental Army for an attack by the British. When he received his copy of the Declaration of Independence, he had it read to his troops to rally and inspire them. To get people pumped, he read them the Declaration.
What about the story that Thomas Jefferson wasn't in fact the primary author?
He did a first draft. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams both had input into it, and so it has some of their editorial additions on it, and then that's what became the Declaration.
Let me be clear, Thomas Jefferson is one of my heroes. And he's my hero because he never took credit for writing the Declaration of Independence. In fact, the average American didn't find out he was the author until it was in his obituary. You're talking about a guy who had so much humility, it didn't even say the word president on his headstone. But some experts believe Jefferson merely edited the Declaration of Independence, and that its unique style, spelling, and capitalization point to Thomas Paine as the primary author. Paine wrote Common Sense, which many point to as the inspiration for the American Revolution. But he was a controversial figure who drank too much and had ideas that were too radical even for the founding fathers.
What about Thomas Paine?
That is a possibility. I think most historians would agree that when Common Sense came out in January of 1776, he opened up a lot of the ideas, and so he kind of laid the groundwork to have people open to what the Declaration was saying.
Trevor, we've also heard some other interesting rumors about the Declarations. I heard that there was some sort of handprint on the back of it. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. There is a handprint on the back. It's one of those great unknowns. We don't know whose handprint it is. We don't know when it was done, but we do know it's there.
Was it intentional?
We have no way of knowing. It was in the hands of the State Department for most of the 19th century, and it was on display for much of that time. It was actually rolled up, and so they'd have to roll it and unroll it several times, so it was almost loved too much.
When you go to the National Archives, you know what the #1 question the guards are asked? Is there a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence, like in the movie National Treasure? There isn't a map, but there is that handprint. Of course, there's been a ton of speculation as to who left the handprint. But my favorite theory is that Thomas Paine put his handprint on the back of the Declaration of Independence to protest not being allowed to sign the document that he wrote.
The true original Declaration of Independence that was passed on July 4th, 1776 is lost. We don't know where it is. It's gone. What you saw is the one that was actually engrossed after New York approved the Declaration.
Okay, nobody advertises that it's lost.
Well, I don't know why, but when they passed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, only 2 people signed it. It was John Hancock, who was the president, and Charles Thompson, who was the secretary of the Continental Congress. And it doesn't say unanimous because New York had not approved it yet.
So I'm having trouble with thinking the Declaration of Independence is lost. I mean, where might it pop up?
But one of the Dunlaps, which of the 200 broadsides, only 26 are known, that were printed on July 4th, actually turned up at a flea market behind a painting somebody bought. They tore the painting apart to take the frame. They were going to use the frame, and there was the Dunlap Declaration of Independence.
The painting was purchased for $4. The copy of the Declaration of Independence sold for over $8 million. That is why my mother, God bless her, loved flea markets. You can get cheap, irregular socks and a copy of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh my, and that's a broadside.
A broadside. That's not the original, and Norman Lear has it. He owns it.
So it's not far-fetched that someone would uncover the
Well, there's only one. You know, there's 200 Dunlap broadsides out there, and we only know of 26. But there's only one that was passed on July 4th, 1776, that was rushed down to the printer. Wow. It's kind of like my dream to find it or be contacted when it is found so I get a chance to hold it and see it.
Okay, here's my favorite part. What they're talking about is called the fair copy of the Declaration of Independence, the true first copy of the Declaration. But after submitting it to Congress, this fair copy disappeared. To this day, it is the holy grail of missing historical artifacts. Jefferson's first complete draft of the Declaration of Independence as we know it.
One of the things I'm interested in is the question of authorship of the Declaration of Independence. Some people say, well, you know, it might well have been Thomas Paine who wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Thomas Paine. And you got to figure, when he wrote Common Sense, Washington was at war, and only 1/3 of the people were behind him.
Right.
And then in January 1776, out comes this Common Sense, and now another third of the country comes behind it. And in Common Sense, what he did was, he said, you know, we have to explain why we're going to declare our independence, which is really what the Declaration of Independence is.
We also heard that we might be celebrating on the wrong day.
Oh, absolutely. We're absolutely celebrating on the wrong day. Independence of the United States of America was declared on July 2nd, 1776.
Right.
The Declaration of Independence is the instrument that explains why we declared our independence. Everybody signed that on August 2nd, 1776.
Do you have any other favorite stories?
Thomas Jefferson Beale Papers. Very, very exciting.
Okay, the Beale Treasure isn't just associated with the Declaration of Independence. It's one of the most fascinating and legendary treasure hunting mysteries of all time. According to the story, over 100 years ago, a wealthy Virginian named Thomas Jefferson Beale, and that's a fake ID name if I ever heard one, buried $65 million of gold and then used a code based on the Declaration of Independence to shield its hiding place. If this story sounds familiar to you, that's because it is. The movie National Treasure took its premise that the Declaration of Independence is in fact a sort of treasure map from the Beale Papers. Beale supposedly hid the location in 3 separate codes, and he used one of the hardest codes in existence to hide it, a code that requires a particular writing to decipher it. In this case, the Declaration of Independence.
Beale was on a hunting expedition from New Mexico into Colorado, and there they discovered a vein of gold with 30 others, and it was extracted and brought east.
You know, there are a lot of people looking for this thing.
Yes, over 100 years, and they're still digging.
Do you think the Beale Papers are legitimate?
You don't know, but it's something, you know, we really should not exhaust, because let's face it, the cipher is very clear.
One of the 3 letters of the Beale Treasure has been decoded using the Declaration of Independence. But what if the other 2 can only be unlocked using that original copy? Buddy McKinley and Scott are about to find out the secret. But imagine finding that original fair copy. The Declaration of Independence had 56 signers. We all remember Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, and Hancock, but 52 other men also put their lives on the line for something they believed in. They might not be famous, but they're all founding fathers. In decoding the Declaration, Buddy, Mac, and Scott have stumbled onto the story of the Beale Treasure, one of the most famous uncracked codes of all time.
The Beale Papers starts in 1817. Not far from here, a rich Virginian organizes a party of 30 adventurous men to go on a hunting expedition to the Great Southwest, the wilderness, Santa Fe. One of the guys goes into a cleft, this mountainous territory, a little flash, and he goes a little further. What is this? What is this? It could be gold, and it is gold. They discover gold. And that pleasurable hunting trip, mercenary, right? What does gold do to you?
Makes you greedy and crazy.
Yeah.
Here's how the story goes. Thomas J. Beale hid the gold near Lynchburg, Virginia, and then wrote 3 ciphered letters. The first detailed where the treasure was, the second, how much was there, and the third, who was intended to inherit it. Beale left the ciphers with an innkeeper named Robert Morris. And this is where the story really gets insane. We're not even sure there was an innkeeper named Morris near Lynchburg, but we are sure there was a founding father named Robert Morris, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Coincidence? Maybe, but you better believe it makes me want to find that original fair copy of the Declaration.
How did the public first become aware of the Beale Papers?
In 1885, James Beverly Ward, a Lynchburg attorney, copyrighted the story in the Library of Congress. He may have been associated with John William Sherman, who was associated with the Lynchburg Virginian newspaper. But my research takes a different tact. My theory is Poe wrote this story.
Edgar Allan
Edgar
Poe?
Allan Poe?
He wrote the story in the 1840s. He also wrote what I believe and many believe is the greatest treasure hunting story ever, called The Gold Bug.
As a mystery writer, of course I'm a fan of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe was famous for writing horror classics like The Pit and the Pendulum and The Raven. But he was also obsessed with codes and was responsible for popularizing cryptography in America. He even used to run contests in the newspaper where he challenged readers to break his codes. So creating a code based on the Declaration of Independence, a document that everyone in America will be familiar with, that's just the kind of thing Poe would have loved. Here's the story of the Gold Bug. It's about a man who decodes a cipher and finds a buried treasure. Sound familiar?
One of the plots of the story is you have to solve a cipher. And it's a substitution cipher that a lot of people get a kick out of it. It's simple enough that you can figure it out, and Poe explains it in the story. It was the first great treasure hunt combined cryptography story, and this is the same kind of story.
So Poe definitely wrote it as a work of fiction. There's no gold out there if Poe wrote it.
If he wrote it, it was to laugh at the mob. He loved to fool people.
And he's still getting a last laugh then,
Yeah,
because he's still fooling people.
That's why I think that, that this is really a literary treasure.
Here's how Beale's cipher really worked. First, he came up with his plain text, what he was trying to say. In the case of the one Beale letter that we have cracked, it was the quantity of gold stored in the vault. Then he chose a key, in this case, the Declaration of Independence, a document that he knew would always be available. Numbering the words of the Declaration chronologically from 1 to 1,322, Beale used the first letter of each word. So every time he found the letter he wanted, he marked the corresponding number in the ciphertext. Sound complicated? It's not, unless you don't have the exact document that Beale was using, which is why code breakers have been banging their heads against the wall to break the other two ciphers for more than 100 years.
If we understand it correctly, though, you are a descendant of Edgar Allan Poe.
I'm descended from his cousin, William.
Okay. You know the work of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
I'm assuming you have looked in a little bit to the Beale papers.
I have.
Okay. Well, as we look at the story of the Beale papers, they keep coming back to Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Did Edgar Allan Poe have any connection to Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence?
He did. Poe was a student at the University of Virginia. The second session that it was open, the university was Thomas Jefferson's pet project. And Jefferson invited all of the students to supper at Monticello. So Poe would have met Jefferson, would have dined with him, and Jefferson had a copy of the Declaration of Independence there in his entryway. You can see it there today.
Is there any possibility that that one is actually what they call the fair copy or the original draft of the Declaration?
No, Jefferson had a limited edition copy, a printed copy, with ornamentation around the edges. It's very rare, very expensive, but that's what he had. Now, his working drafts I saw in the Library of Congress some years ago. He did not retain those because that belonged to the nation.
Hal, in your professorial opinion, looking at literary style and context, could Edgar Allan Poe have written the Beale papers?
Just think about the idea that it contains many elements similar to Poe. Every mystery story is in the style of Edgar Allan Poe because Poe invented the mystery story.
Okay, ready for something cool? Nearly every mystery can fit into one of 5 categories, all of which can be credited to Edgar Allan Poe. There's the treasure map story where you have to solve a mystery to get to the mystery. There's the innocent man falsely accused. There's the mystery where the detective knows the villain but must trick him into confessing. And of course, the classic whodunit. But my favorite kind is the 5th, as in Poe's story, The Purloined Letter. Where's the answer? Hidden in plain sight.
But Poe died in 1849, and the Beale papers were written way later. It makes reference to what in some sections of Virginia is still referred to as the late unpleasantness. The Civil War is referenced in the Beale papers.
So Hal, based on what you've told us, we can rule out Edgar Allan Poe as the author of the Beale papers.
I think that's right. Whoever wrote it was writing in the tradition of Poe that continues to this day, but you would need to look somewhere else for the one who created this story.
It was an incredible theory. The problem is that Edgar Allan Poe, died before this all came about.
Yeah, a Poe copycat, maybe.
That's true.
Possibly.
But here's the big key. It's the Beale Papers. So if Thomas Beale never existed, then it is a hoax. So how do we find out if Thomas Beale ever truly existed?
Well, there's got to be some sort of records out there. I mean, birth certificates weren't necessarily kept back then, death certificates, but they were in some instances. There could even be military records which were kept back then.
Or land ownership, something.
Absolutely, something in the newspaper. So if this guy existed, there's got to be some written documentation of it somewhere.
Library of Congress. So most of my stuff should be online in the Library of Congress database.
We're going to hit the card catalog and then check, see what we can find there.
What did you find?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, I couldn't find anything that says that Thomas Beale actually existed. There's no records.
Well, the Beale Papers exist, obviously, and are copyrighted. I searched by title to find the Beale Papers. Here they are.
Oh, yeah, look.
The Beale Papers, containing authentic statements regarding the treasure buried in 1819 and 1821 Virginia.
Okay, that's legitimate. I mean, this is legitimate, copyrighted. So James Beverly Ward.
And the first place that this was published is in the Lynchburg Virginian, which belongs to John William Sherman. We know that guy exists.
Right.
And the author here is James B. Ward.
Well, here's the question I would have. Can we assume he existed because he copywrote these papers?
Is James B. Ward fake?
We found evidence of the Beale Papers, but the strange thing is, Thomas Jefferson Beale did not own the copyright. The owners were two guys named James Ward and John William Sherman.
The Declaration of Independence is arguably the most significant document in our history, yet the original copy is missing, lost somewhere in America. Some believe that not only is it lost, but that it may be holding the key to a $65 million gold treasure. So Buddy McKinley and Scott have been looking at the Declaration of Independence in hopes of tracking down Thomas J. Beale's treasure. So far, they've been focused solely on Beale himself, but their investigation has just turned up two new suspects, James Beverly Ward and John William Sherman.
Hey, Brad.
What we have to remember is history is a centuries-old game of telephone. And what do we do in the game of telephone? We have to find who made the first whisper. Listen, we have to go back to the same question we always ask, the most vital question of all, who benefits? The first whisper is usually the person who profited.
Who made the first whisper? I think Robert Ward said something about the first place the Beale Papers appeared.
The Beale Papers claim to contain authentic statements concerning treasure buried in 1819 and 1821, but they weren't actually published until 1885. That gave the innkeeper Robert Morris plenty of time to decode the second cipher. The author of the Beale Papers was kept anonymous, but the publisher and copywriter were not. The copyright belonged to James Beverly Ward, and it was published by the Lynchburg Virginian.
The newspaper.
Whoever advertised them.
There you go.
What's the guy who published them on the
Ward.
copyright? Who is Ward?
Yeah, and is Ward in any way connected to the newspaper?
That's the question.
You smell that? That was decoding just now. I just heard it.
Do you think that Thomas Beale even actually existed?
Yes, there are records of him in New Orleans. I have at least one picture of a court document and his name appears there.
And it fit the date and time.
Yes, yes,
We've come across James Beverly Ward.
yes. Well, he was a key player, no question about it. He applied for copyright to the Librarian of Congress as agent for the author.
Who's that man? Is he associated with the Lynchburg Virginian?
Absolutely.
John William Sherman?
John William Sherman. John William Sherman was the editor of the newspaper. In November of '85, John William Sherman bought the newspaper from Charles Button. They paid $5,000 down and a $10,000 IOU. Well, within 6 months, the paper ran into financial difficulties. And that is when the advertising campaign started to sell the Beale papers for 10 cents, a dime. He hatched the idea, but he couldn't have his name on it because everybody knew him. So that's why he went to James Ward, who was his cousin, and asked him to apply for copyright on his behalf.
And they ran the ads for the Beale papers in the paper? In their paper?
In the Lynchburg Virginian, nowhere else. So these ads appeared 84 times, from the spring of '86 to the end of August of '86. That's almost every second day or so.
Who else could afford to run this many ads?
Exactly.
Follow the money, right? That's always the key part of the story. And when you follow it here, it leads right back to the profits of a newspaper that benefited from people believing the story. And for the first time, I'm starting to wonder if the great Beale Treasure is nothing more than a great hoax.
So there is no code. You can't crack 1 and 3 because there's nothing there to crack.
There's nothing there to crack.
It's one thing to be an editor of a newspaper, but did John William Sherman have the skills, the capability to write a story of this magnitude?
He was a very talented writer. Not only did he write virtually all of the newspaper, but in his nighttime, he was a dime novelist. And in Sherman's dime novels, he mixes real people from the past with fictional events today. A great many are also on the themes of gold and treasure.
Why is it that you haven't put this thing to rest? There are people still looking, right?
Oh, treasure hunters will never give up.
We've now heard some pretty compelling evidence to suggest that the location of the Beale Treasure might not be unlocked with the Declaration of Independence. For over 125 years, people have been chasing this Beale Treasure. They've used the Declaration to crack one of its 3 coded letters, but the other 2, nothing. As a result, many scream that it's simply a 19th century hoax. But we just found 2 people who insist that everyone's been looking in the wrong place. The search for the Declaration of Independence has led us to the Beale Treasure. It's something that people have been chasing for more than a century. We've uncovered a few inaccuracies, and we're uncertain whether the treasure's reputed owner, Thomas J. Beale, was a real person or an alias based on the name of the Declaration's architect, Thomas Jefferson.
If there is $65 million still out there, there's probably a paper trail still. There's got to be documentary evidence of this hunt.
I'm curious more about the cryptography, how specifically it works, how the Declaration of Independence unlocked that second message and how you get to the first and third.
Everyone dreams of discovering treasure, right? And it happens more often than you think. In the 1980s, silver and gold from a sunken pirate ship were found off the coast of New England. In 2009, 1,500 pieces of gold, silver, and precious stones were unearthed in a field in Great Britain. The search for the original Declaration of Independence has led Buddy, Scott, and McKinley to the Beale Treasure. Scott and McKinley are now meeting with a codebreaker who insists that he's made a breakthrough in the Beale case.
Can you explain to us how 2 was decoded using Declaration of Independence?
They took the words of the Declaration of Independence and numbered them.
Okay.
And as they went through, they took the first letter of those words to create the cipher.
So the first number in the cipher is 115. So I should go to the 115th word,
And use the first letter,
which is instituted.
I.
I just take the I. Second one is 73. Hold.
So it's H.
H. 21, 22, 23, 24. A. 800, and so is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Army most? Oh, it's a V.
Yep.
I have.
It's starting to look like I have, yeah.
37.
Should be an E, is it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
It's an E?
Equal. I have. So is that written out somewhere?
Yeah, actually, the plain text is below the cipher. It
Oh, look.
starts.
Oh, okay.
I have deposited in the county of Bedford about 4 miles from Buford's in a
Excavation or vault.
war vault
6 feet.
below the
it's-
surface of the ground.
So this works perfectly for the second cipher, but it doesn't seem to work for the first.
Right. The Declaration of Independence was not used for 1 and 3.
Okay.
Now, it's been tried, it's been done that way, and it comes out mostly as gibberish. Whether or not there is a document that they used is yet to be found. People have been working on this for 175 years and have not had the ability to crack it.
David learned to crack codes from an NSA cryptologist, the best code crackers in the entire world. David's mentor is not the first NSA man to become obsessed with the Beale ciphers. In fact, the Beale codes captured the attention of William Friedman, who was the NSA's first chief cryptologist. Friedman helped the US win World War II by breaking Japan's Purple Code. He also made the Beale ciphers part of the training program for incoming code breakers. He spoke of the diabolical ingenuity of the ciphers, and he devoted many years to trying to break them himself. So if the Beale ciphers are a scam, then over the years, they've scammed some of our very best.
But a friend of mine who happened to work for the NSA deciphered the locality of the vault using the frequency method, how frequently the letter occurs in the English language. By counting the numbers, you find the most frequent number, and that would be the most frequent letter.
So say 71 appears over and over and over. You know 71 is going to be...
Probably an E
Okay.
or an S.
Okay. It's just like solving those puzzles where letters stand for other letters. If you see an X, a lot of times you can guess that it's an S or an E.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That is exactly the frequency
Okay.
method. This says the vault location, buried New Orleans. Treasure rests near Stone, in location at Creole Tashone Nation.
So do you know where it is reading this? Because I don't.
I have found a location that I think is where the treasure rests.
I was going to say, so you do have a trip to New Orleans planned. David, there have been some incredibly smart people looking at this for a long time. I mean, why in the world hasn't anybody been able to find it yet?
People are looking in Virginia. They're digging holes in Virginia, not in New Orleans.
And why aren't you there with a shovel?
Well, it's currently flooded.
Oh.
The Mississippi River overflowed, so I expect that the vault's probably filled in with sediment anyway.
That won't be the case forever, though.
No, it'll dry out, so then we'll go.
Whatever you think about the Beale treasure, the frequency method potentially just unlocked what thousands of treasure hunters have been searching for: the location of the treasure in the very first Beale letter. So is it there? We won't know the answer until the area dries out. But meanwhile, Buddy is meeting with another treasure hunter who believes that the key to unlocking the code and unlocking Beale lies within the Declaration of Independence itself.
I understand you might have an interesting theory about Beale papers.
I picked up a book, The Memoirs of Jean Lafitte, and as I was going through there, I was just constantly getting thumped in the head. You know, this works with the Beale thing. I just started running some correlation between the dates, the periods, the information in both books. This is exactly the same language. This is exactly the same dates. It just kept going. The coincidences were stacking up so fast, it was like, at what point do coincidences no longer mean coincidences?
And what were some of those coincidences?
The dates that Jean Lafitte has money out there. In both books, all of these dates are coming together at the same point in time.
You're talking about the Memoirs of Jean Lafitte and then the Beale papers.
Exactly.
John Lafitte is a name that comes up very often in the study of the Beale papers. Some say that the Beale treasure actually belonged to pirate Lafitte. Lafitte was a pirate and a smuggler who operated around the Gulf of Mexico 60 years before the Beale ciphers ever came to light. His success as a pirate made him rich enough to account for much more than the $65 million treasure that we're looking for, and it made him a wanted man in the state of Louisiana. And let's be clear, it also makes him look like the guy who parked Cameron's car in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But Lafitte appears to have developed a strong sense of American patriotism, and he offered his services to Andrew Jackson to fight alongside him during the War of 1812. Lafitte and his men successfully helped beat up the British Navy in the Battle of New Orleans, and in turn, Jackson praised his courage and fidelity before granting him a full pardon.
How did you get from the memoirs of Jean Lafitte all the way back to Thomas Beale?
It's an arrest warrant that connects Thomas Beale with Lafitte.
Can I see it?
Yeah, sure. This is an arrest warrant for Lafitte. It is signed and issued by
none other than Thomas Beale,
who is a ward of the court.
So that would make him either a lawyer or...
Basically, he's doing the same thing sheriffs do today when they serve warrants.
There you go. After all this time, proof that Thomas J. Beale did exist. And now we have opportunity. When Beale captured Lafitte, he could have easily captured his treasure. The connection to Beale is startling.
If that's true, then the probability that this is still out there, it's pretty good. Lafitte's very clear in his memoirs. He was focused on the United States of America for all the principles to that most sacred document, the Declaration of Independence. All the elements are here.
The Declaration of Independence is interwoven into almost every detail of the Beale papers. The treasure was reportedly buried in Bedford, Virginia, former home of our third president, Thomas Jefferson. So why pick that town? What's its relation to the Declaration? That's the kicker. Back then, Bedford, Virginia went by a very different name. It was called Liberty. So you tell me what better location there is for a mystery that's based on the Declaration of Independence.
Everything comes back to the core principles in the Declaration of Independence. Everything.
I think David Oxford's theory of the treasure being in New Orleans makes a lot more sense. I mean, the cipher was deciphered by a person who works for the NSA, which gives it some credibility.
And it was straight from the cipher rather than the cipher leading you to Edgar Allan Poe. It was more straightforward.
But here's the thing. They found that the treasure is in New Orleans, but it's underwater. It's a place where we can't dig.
So it gets you to a place that can't be unearthed, so we'll never know.
And they didn't use the Declaration on the first cipher. They used a different system.
Brad Andrews, the man I talked to, believes that, I mean, he showed me a court document that connects Thomas J. Beale to the pirate Jean Lafitte of New Orleans. And this thing is legit.
Well, you know what I like about that, too? The story of, like, the hunters going and just running across this gold mine and then mining it, But a pirate, those guys have treasure. They just steal it.
Yeah, and listen, Jean Lafitte and his brother, the pirates Lafitte, were notorious corsairs of the Gulf. They definitely plundered Spanish ships.
They had money.
They had money, they had treasure.
Right. That makes more sense to me.
Well, this seemed pretty specific. A lot of the things really pinpoint almost an exact location.
Wow. Do you buy it?
I don't know if I buy it. Why would you give out clues to a treasure you know existed?
If $65 million is out there, the last thing you're going to do is print information where someone else can go find it.
Right, so is it a brilliant, brilliant story and a brilliant plan, or is it an elaborate hoax?
Investigating the Declaration of Independence has put us on the trail of Thomas J. Beale and a reported $65 million in treasure. We've just learned that Thomas Beale was real, and we now know he had access to a very real treasure. But will the Declaration of Independence someday lead a treasure hunter to real riches? Buddy McKinley and Scott are still searching for that answer. By decoding the Declaration of Independence, we learned the original fair copy is still missing. And the Declaration itself could lead to $65 million hidden by the mysterious Virginian known as Thomas J. Beale. The Declaration of Independence is the key to our democracy. But here's the best part. Is it also the key to a national treasure that's still out there right now and still up for grabs?
It was really good.
Right?
A little more intense than a West Coast Slurpee.
This and cheesesteaks, what could be better?
Very Philly, exactly. So it's sort of fitting that this journey we've been on in the last few days has led us right here to the signing spot of the Declaration of Independence, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. These guys who signed the Declaration of Independence were men of the Enlightenment. They were really big fans of logic, reason, and they wanted us to be educated.
Well, you know, being out here reminds me of what was at stake at that point in time.
Absolutely.
I mean, these guys had land, and they had money, and they had wealth and comfort, and they were willing to give it all up to draft that treasonous document, the Declaration of Independence. I mean, how incredible that there's something else coming out of it.
So do you think the original Declaration of Independence is still out there somewhere?
To me, there was a bit of authenticity there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure there's a Declaration of Independence out there somewhere. But aren't you amazed at the roads we went down?
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
The arrows were pointing everywhere in
Right.
this story. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe.
John Lafitte.
Yes.
And that's the thing, there's enough in the story that's believable. There's enough that's fact-based and that is verifiable through historical records that you get tantalized by it and you're drawn in.
I did get a little bit drawn into the Library of Congress when I saw that someone had gone in and copyrighted papers about the existence of a treasure.
This is the kind of story a writer dreams about having written. One that nobody can quite figure out. It's a whodunit, it's a treasure tale, it is a political thriller. You've got all the stuff that makes for one hell of a story. And there's enough there that people can't definitively, over 126 years, just rule it out. I feel bad for John William Sherman, the writer who never really gets the accolades that he deserves for having created this remarkable, remarkable tale. I mean, this story, look, it took us back through a history lesson on the writing of the Declaration of Independence.
So did Thomas Beale exist?
Jury's still out for me on whether Thomas Jefferson Beale existed, because there were references to Beale Street in New Orleans. The Beales were a prominent Virginia family, so I believe that Thomas J. Beale existed.
Yeah, I think there was a Thomas Beale, not specifically
Right.
that went on a hunting trip and did all those things, but I'm sure there was a Thomas Beale out there somewhere.
I don't believe Thomas Jefferson Beale existed or needed to exist. He's just a fictional character. He's a name. I believe he was penned by John William Sherman. Brad was exactly right when he said this is a game of telephone and we needed to find the first whisper. And that first whisper came from John William Sherman.
Really, towards the end, it just started to make sense when you saw that they were selling the pamphlets. It was the guy that printed it. They put it in their own newspaper. No other news organizations picked it up. The story got dismantled. It was a masterful defense knocking down the prosecution's theory.
So are you all comfortable making this conclusion that the writer of the Beale Papers was John William Sherman?
I believe that.
100%.
I believe that.
I am too.
100%.
As a mystery writer, I so want to believe that the Declaration of Independence holds the secret key to $65 million of pirates' gold. Buddy McKinley and Scott are all convinced that John William Sherman is the one who wrote the Beale ciphers and wrote the Beale Papers and that the entire thing is a hoax. But I'm not so sure. Just because a story sells newspapers doesn't mean it's a fake. Yes, Sherman was a novelist, but maybe that just proves he knew a great story when he saw it. One fact remains inarguable. There are 2 codes, 2 Beale letters that haven't yet been cracked. If David Oxford's frequency method is correct, we could have proof that Beale is real as soon as the water levels come down in New Orleans. As for that very first real copy of the Declaration of Independence, as someone who loves history, I'd love to get my hands on it, and I know where it is. It's in the same place that the last few copies of the Declaration have been. It's in your attic, it's in your basement, and it's hidden behind the painting you just bought at the flea market. Someone out there has it. Go and look. This is our chance to find it. And when we do, that piece of history will be the greatest treasure of all.